Professor of Business Advising and the Director of the Business Advising Program. And we're very excited to have all of you here. We've started up a series of conversations with lawyers and business leaders that are going to speak to us about topics that I think you'll all find of interest. Our topic today is ESG reporting for publicly traded companies. A conversation with John Thomas, CEO of Physicians Realty Trust. We're really grateful to John. He's been a great friend of the law school and has come in numerous times to speak to alumni and students. And we're grateful that he's here today. John is a graduate of the Vanderbilt Law School, had a very illustrious career as a lawyer. And as sort of a capstone now, he is the CEO of a large real estate investment company referred to as a real estate investment trust. John's company owns $7 billion of real estate, and that represents approximately 15 million square feet of essentially hospitals, medical complexes, clinics. I'll let John talk a little bit about the kinds of investments that his company made, but we're very excited to have him here, and we're grateful for all of you to coming and joining us. John, first, I'd just like you to talk a little bit about how you ended up as the CEO of this very large real estate investment company, and talk a little bit about what your company does.
Yeah, thanks, Christian. Thanks for having me. It's always good to spend time with you and your classes and your colleagues. So again, as Christian said, I'm John Thomas, CEO of Physicians Realty Trust. We're a publicly traded real estate investment trust, which is a creature of the tax law, and we can talk a little bit about that. But we, as Christian said, excuse me a second. As Christian said, we are focused on investing exclusively in medical related real estate. So medical office buildings primarily, so outpatient medical care, and other facilities where you would go to the doctor, you take your child to the doctor, you take your family to a physician, and a lot of outpatient surgery. So we most of our real estate is focused on outpatient care, and kind of where we think the growth is will continue in the future of care delivery. My path to here is a kind of long and wavy path. I highlighted the fact that REITs are a function of the tax law. Christian and I shared offices at both of our first jobs at a law firm on Wall Street. We both did kind of different kinds of tax, and I ended up doing kind of partnership and bankruptcy taxation, M&A taxation, and that led to eventually getting involved in healthcare mergers and acquisitions. This is the early 90s when there really were no for-profit taxable hospital operators. Almost all hospitals in the country were tax exempt, and most still are tax exempt entities. But in any event, there was a company, newfound company in the early 90s, led by a guy named Rick Scott, who's y'all might have heard of, who's now Senator Rick Scott, who was running around trying to buy nonprofit hospitals. And the experience I had, even as a young lawyer representing pension plans and other tax exempt organizations, kind of led to me getting involved in helping hospitals, tax exempt hospitals, essentially sell themselves to a for-profit operator. That led to eventually going in-house with a large faith-based Catholic healthcare system in St. Louis, eventually to the Baylor Health Care System in Dallas, another very large, sophisticated, tax-exempt, nonprofit, faith-based healthcare organization. And oddly enough, it was really kind of that combination of experience that led the CEO of a real estate investment trust who wanted to start investing in medical office facilities. Kind of indirectly reached out to me and asked me if I would consider coming to work for the REIT and helping them grow their medical office platform. And my name's John Thomas, which is a fairly common name. I went to high school with two other John Thomases, know lots of other John Thomases around the country. And I thought he had the wrong person because I wasn't involved in management of a publicly traded company, a real estate company, certainly not a REIT. But the end result was of that kind of query about why he was even talking to me was that the genesis of real estate investing is if the commercial real estate is if you can understand the business of the tenant, the person, the organization is going to use the real estate, then you can make good real estate investments. And that in his view, the CEO's view, the real estate itself was the easy part. The hard part was understanding, who's a good tenant, who's a good investment to make in. And so that led to me joining that REIT. And then again, fast forward 8 years ago, had the opportunity to start a REIT with a couple of other gentlemen who had a private company and invested in medical office facilities. So 2013, we took a kind of a ragtag bunch on a road show, 3 people who had commitments from an investment fund that owned 18 buildings and about 500,000 square feet. It's about $125 million worth of real estate. It's a crazy idea. Didn't think it would work, but lo and behold, it did. And the public market was receptive and has fueled us to, as Christian said, once we close some deals, which we recently announced, will be about $6 billion in market cap, a little over $7 billion in kind of total real estate value. So it's been a long, windy path. It took about 23 years to, actually 33 years to go from that first day on the job with Christian and on Wall Street to actually being, running a publicly traded company. But it's been a great fun, great opportunity.
Yeah. John, our focus of this discussion is about what's become, and I've never seen anything rise so quickly in importance for investors, what they refer to as ESG. And it's gone from, 10 years ago, I don't even remember really seeing this. I mean, there's some of the ideas you talked about, but the way it's been formalized, and now we have what they commonly refer to as ESG reporting for publicly traded companies. And I was hoping you could discuss, sort of what ESG means and the reporting obligations, if they're regulatory or driven by the stock exchange, how that's affecting you.
Yeah, it is amazing how fast did I lose y'all? There we go. It is amazing how fast ESG has become such an important, not buzzword, but not only a movement. I mean, I think it's something that's here to stay and something that's important. But the interesting thing about ES and G is, again, to get grounded, E is environmental impact of your organization. S is kind of the social impact of your organization, both inward and outward. How you as an organization relate to your team and vice versa. And then G is governance, which G's probably had the most, probably has the most regulation around, if you will, from a governance standpoint about, particularly as a public company, what the New York Stock Exchange, what the SEC requires, what, kind of what good business practice and precedent requires around the governance of an organization. But that's, it's typically been focused on, governance structures and having an audit committee, having a governance committee, nominating a governance committee and things like that. You have a lot of flexibility in your bylaws to create a publicly traded corporation or any corporation. But governance has had has more history and kind of what's fueling that. But the 3 terms don't have a whole lot to do with each other in silos, but what they really encompass is really socially conscious investing, or socially conscious, or organizations that are run with a social conscience, if you will. E and talking about the environmental impact, it's kind of, as a real estate company, there's lots of things we can do to manage our buildings better. We can invest in automation systems, energy systems, water systems, that lower our environmental impact, that improve our environmental impact, and the operation of the building, which again, within the ESG context has the most kind of impact on our dollars and cents business model, which is if we can lower the cost of to our tenants by having better energy utilization or better energy systems, then that's a savings to the tenant, to their operations. And in our business, healthcare, that's a good thing. We're helping to lower the cost of healthcare. S really has driven again to the forefront with particularly in the last couple of years, because it's not just about social justice by any means, but it is one part of the societal impact that your business has and the communities. We think about the communities we serve. Again, as a real estate company that owns real estate in 38 states, lots of communities. We own real estate in Minneapolis. And again, I was getting around to the kind of social justice events that, or the events that led to, a focus on the social justice movement in Minneapolis and Atlanta and Chicago and other events last summer that led to a lot of debate and a lot of impact on the social conscious of everybody. And then, like I said, I'll spend more time on G, but in a minute. But to get to your point, Christian, when we did our IPO in 2013, an IPO roadshow, which is a lot of hard work for a long time, but particularly the last kind of 10 days as you lead up to your IPO. We had meeting after meeting after meeting and city after city after city, really about 1 hour at a time, with large investors, whether it's Fidelity or kind of small mutual funds or small money managers. You kind of give everybody about the same amount of time. And I don't remember one single question about ESG. That was 2013. I don't remember one question about the environmental impact of our business and how we intended, to operate in that perspective, or what we were going to do about, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is a big part of of S. And then, there was some folks on G, like, who's your audit committee chairman? Who's your governance committee chairman? What's the makeup of your board? But even then, when we set up the board originally, we had, just be blunt and frank, we had 6 white guys, and we had an African-American board member who I had a long history with, and a member of the Baylor Health Care System board, still is, but was somebody that was a mentor to me and was a kind of easy addition to the board. I didn't even think about him being an African-American, but there was that diversity byproduct. But we didn't have a woman on the board, and nobody even asked this question about having a woman on the board. Today, I don't think you could have an IPO. I don't think you could achieve a successful IPO without at least one woman and probably 2 or 3. And, a lot of focus on that on our organization today. I'm happy to talk about that in a minute. But it's gone, from 2013, nobody asked a single question, where today, as we have investor meetings and routine investor meetings, we may spend half the meeting talking about ESG factors. We may spend the entire meeting talking about ESG issues and what we're doing, and very little questions on financial performance of the company.
How, and pardon me my ignorance, the benefit for the board. The ESG reporting requirements, are those imposed now by the SEC or by by the stock exchange with respect to what you're disclosing now to the public?
There's really not a lot of formal required disclosure. It's really driven by, I'll say, market forces. There's more and more, kind of coming. There's more and more coming by precedent and just kind of, best practices, if you will. Securities lawyers, as you file your Qs, your quarterly financials, your 10Qs and your 10Ks, your annual, and then your proxy. There's more and more in the regs, with question kind of Q&A format. They're requiring you to report things, but there's not a lot of formality to it. It's more, I'd say, best practices. NASDAQ has a rule now that its member companies, I'm not sure the effective date of it, but NASDAQ has a rule now that to list on the NASDAQ, you have to have a certain percentage. I think it's at least 2 and maybe 30%. We'll talk about that in a minute, but female members of the board. The New York Stock Exchange has not adopted a formal rule, a policy on that point. We're traded on the New York Stock Exchange, but there's not a lot of formality. There's some state legislation that has some requirements, both on reporting, but also just on function. So like California, again, I think we're not headquartered in California, so it didn't apply to us, but I think California requires all publicly traded companies headquartered in California to have at least 2 females on the board. It's something where most of the, I'll say guidance and reporting disclosure requirements comes from, I'm going to say the market, but it really is coming from, your large, very large asset managers. BlackRock, being the largest asset manager in the world. They manage like $6 trillion. They have a fairly specific, policy statement about what they want to see reported and, kind of what standards they believe their public company, that the companies that they invest in should require. Now, what's interesting about BlackRock is a lot of their money is passive investment, meaning they're investing in companies because they fall within a particular index or fall within a particular industry, and they just passively invest in everybody based upon their relative size. But that doesn't slow them down from reading your proxy, calling you with questions, kind of imposing their will to some extent, and more, large investors are doing that. And then there are agencies or organizations called proxy advisory services, which again, they don't have the force of law, but large pension plans, large mutual funds, instead of reading every proxy from every publicly traded company, pay these firms to do that for them, and then they create standards that they seek to impose on you or seek to hold you to, and kind of the ultimate consequence of their voting against you or advising their clients to vote against you on shareholder rights issues and other things is based upon their policy statements around ESG.
John, I thought it was really interesting when you've talked. John was gracious enough to talk to my class about my business organizations class about some of these issues, and I found it fascinating the fact that the investors may not necessarily focus all on ESG, but they may focus on a particular letter as they come, and they seem to do that. I mean, you're kind of feeling some of them have more of an agenda on one particular area than another as they're doing this.
Yeah, it really is interesting because it's as I said before, the letters don't have a lot to do with each other than they kind of fall within the socially conscious investor kind of umbrella. So, give you, I think, examples, really helpful here. So European investors, so European pension plans, European life insurance companies, others that, that might buy stock in our company, and a lot do, they'll call us and ask us a lot of questions about the environmental impact of our buildings and what we're doing about the environmental impact of our buildings. I reference, one of the early questions we received, probably 2015, 2016, one of the European investors was, this is a quote, what was our board's policy on end of world events? And you have to really think about that question to understand what they're really asking about. Now, I've kind of got a silly bone, and I said pray, because if it's in the world, I thought pray was probably the right thing to do. But I knew what they were asking, and they didn't think that was funny, but they did let me transition to a more serious response. And really, I mean, it's partly, if you think about global, the global warming and the impact of global warming on coastal and coastal real estate, or global warming on weather events. And again, we're a real estate company, and the impact that has on the buildings, but more importantly, the people that are in our buildings, and the value of our investments. And so there is a tie to the through their investment. But
well, how do they phrase those? How do they phrase their environmental questions? Do they want you to have a quantification of what you're doing, or do they want to hear your vision for how you're doing things, or do they want you to compare how you're doing with European companies? Kind of what are they getting at when they're?
Yeah, it's really all of the above, Christian, and I think that's the way we approach it. We've always had in my job previous to this, which was doing the exact same thing just for a different company, was kind of certainly nothing wrong with managing your buildings better for the benefit of the tenants by better energy utilization, lowering the cost, training tenants how to better manage their space, waste utilization. Where all of our tenants are healthcare providers, so they use a lot of water, but we can still create water conservancy techniques in the buildings and things like that, and train the tenants. The tenants have to engage in all these efforts. Some energy management systems are automated and kind of helpful, but at the same time, the tenants have to engage and support the effort. And so, those have a direct financial tie and a direct benefit to the environmental impact of the building, the carbon footprint, if you will. So, what investors are looking for is a philosophical commitment, which we have. It's easy. That's always been part of our organization. Two, they want to know what your impact is today. And again, you can't really change things unless you know what you're changing. And so, in our organization, we spent, once we got to scale where we could have some impact with our buildings, we spent a year really just capturing all the data we could around the impact of our buildings. And again, this is energy utilization, water utilization, waste diversion, things like that. And then techniques to manage, again, in a global sense for your buildings, your carbon footprint. And then, there's several international accords. There's the 2050 initiative, there's the 2030, goals, which is, kind of lowering your carbon footprint either down by 30% by 2030 or to zero by 2050. And so, what is our path to get there? And, can we, and will we make a commitment to get there? So we have committed to the 2030 goal. To go much below that, it's, our sense at this time, you have to, it's really about buying credits at that point, not necessarily lowering the carbon footprint of your building, but, buying credits from others who, have more ability to lower the carbon footprint from their organizations, and then kind of buying those credits to offset. So we've committed to the 30% by 2030. And then as technology and other things evolve, we'll commit to it there. But they're looking for a philosophical commitment, B, that you mean what you say, and then they want transparency and accountability. And so it's about reporting and then accountability. Whether if you're not meeting your goals, then be transparent and show how you're going to meet your goals in the future. So if you look on our website, beginning last year, we produced our first annual ESG report. We produced our second one this June. It's not required by law by now, right now, but the market requires you to report these things annually, really from now on, and more often than that.
How expensive is it for you as the landlord of all of these buildings? And you can reduce your environmental footprint if your tenants will do X, Y, and Z. How does that work when you go to them? I mean, are you able to factor it into the leases, or is it a negotiation? Are they happy to do it? Who kind of absorbs the cost, at least the startup costs of doing this kind of stuff?
Yeah, there's a great question. Again, from a real estate company, I mean, we essentially run as a triple net business, meaning our tenants pay us rent. They also pay the operating cost of the building in addition to their base rent. And so within our leases and when they're within the business model, and tenants are used to this, if we make investments in the building that lower that operating cost, it lowers their cost to stay in the building. But at the same time, we can amortize and accrue back that investment over time, like depreciation, and again, charge the tenants back for that. So that's not meant to say that, we will spend anything and don't care because the tenants pay for it. Just the opposite. I mean, we're very focused on investing in systems and again, better roofs, better, whatever the capital investment is. Light bulbs is one of the easy low hanging fruits, for us. And so, those things we want to invest in those items that have the most impact, and then lowers the cost of the tenant. But again, ancillarily, and maybe more importantly, in this global sense, lowers the carbon footprint. So economically, we can, recoup a big part of that investment, but it's still about making the right investments. And some investments can have two different environmental impacts that are both good, but also, negatively affect other investments you're trying to make. So like last year, we spent, doesn't sound like a lot of money, but we spent about $3.5 million in 2020 on in capital investments, direct dollars, in lighting and some better energy management systems in some buildings. And we have a kind of a budget ongoing, into the future for that. There's an overhead commitment to it. We have a small handful, but a handful of people who that are part of just our general overhead that help us evaluate, manage, collect the data, and then report that data out. So it's an expensive proposition, but again, so it's an easy investment to make.
It strikes me that these are fairly specialized analysis and understanding of E, S, and G that for a company like yours, do you hire specialists in this, or do you hire consultants? And kind of an ancillary question is, what does a smaller company do? Are they able to deal with these, with these kind of new obligations? And it seems a lot of it is just understanding exactly what needs to be done and creating plans, all of which requires a lot of expertise.
Yeah, I used the words a minute ago when we got up to scale in 2016. So if you have 500,000 square feet and 18 buildings, that's we at that point we had 5 people in the organization, and I was happy to do whatever we could do, along these areas. But we had no money to pay ourselves, much less to invest in environmental efforts on 18 buildings and truly focused on big picture things that we could do. When we got in 2016, we made some fairly large acquisitions, and we started approaching kind of 10 million square feet. And at 10 million square feet, you have enough overhead to commit time and resources, the energy, and hire people. But also you have a large enough footprint that you can have a direct impact, with your tenants and on the buildings. And so it takes a certain amount of scale. I mean, a small business, it's really would be very difficult to do much other than, it doesn't take a lot of dollars or people to, do socially conscious good things in the communities. A day with Habitat for Humanity, a day. We in our organization, we have what's called VTO, which is volunteer day off, which is we give everybody a day off to go volunteer for whatever organization they want to, again, to kind of make their own personal, and us corporately supporting that. So those kind of things in governance, and having a good diverse workforce and a good diversity within governance doesn't require necessarily a lot of dollars or big organization, but E takes a lot. You can always set up a recycling bin and enforce that discipline and create that philosophy, but to make a big impact, there's a lot of capital necessary to do it well.
Now, we haven't spent much time talking about governance, and I think this is interesting because I think the E and the S are, E is clearly focused on climate, S, social issues, societal justice, and stuff like that. Governance almost seems to be focused on the investor making money. To a certain extent, he's wanting to make sure that you're responsive to him and maybe I'm misinterpreting that, but I mean, I think the governance piece is a little bit different than the first two pieces, but all good, you know, in terms of capitalism, society, and everything. Is that, I mean, do you have any insights or thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think, as I said before, governance probably has the most formal rules, whether they're SEC rules or, you know, Delaware corporate law rules, or again, other state corporate rules. So if you're a public company, the NYSE and NASDAQ, as I said before, has some specific requirements. But what used to be setting up a transparent, you know, governance or accountable organization, you know, has evolved as well to, you know, kind of minimum gender requirements, minimum diversity requirements of your board, and then an expectation that your workforce reflects. I think there are different ways to say this, but most organizations would say, and most policing organizations, if you will, or investors would say, you know, a workforce that reflects the communities that you're, you know, where you live and work. And we went down the path earlier about how European investors are so focused on, you know, kind of the environmental impacts of ESG. You know, there's many organizations that are more focused on G, and specifically gender diversity or diversity generally of your board and composition. So we had one investor as a pension plan for an order of Catholic nuns who had adopted a formal policy that they would not own the stock of a public traded company unless it had at least 2 women on the board. We do have a lady on the board currently, which we added 3 years ago, but we only have 1, and they expect at least 2. Others have similar requirements, but using in the terms of percentages, so 30% of the board they expect to, you know, be gender diverse. And the consequence, you know, with the nuns was they told us they were going to sell our stock because we we only had 1 woman on the board. And, you know, certainly we don't want anybody ever selling our stock. And so we're responsive to that. And again, not that our board doesn't want more women on the board or is resisting changing the board. It's just a matter of board, you know, board compositions and, you know, the culture of the board. You know, boards have their own culture, and boards have their own kind of operating, you know, model between management, the board, and shareholders. You know, that these are important decisions, and so our board is now very intentional about adding another woman to the board, not just because of the letter from the nuns selling their stock, but it's an important thing to do. But that's just an example of an organization not focused on our financial returns. They weren't complaining or even objecting to the financial returns that we're getting from us. They wanted more gender diversity, and that's these proxy advisory services. As I mentioned before, we've had at least one shareholder call us with a similar, kind of the same issue, but, you know, really gender by the policy of the proxy advisory service.
Well, you know, I've looked at your website and looked at the ESG reporting section. I'm curious, are you disclosing things now that you wouldn't have disclosed 10 years ago in any way? And are you disclosing things that you just as soon not disclose? I'm not trying to, I'm not asking for a confession or anything. I'm just saying, you know, has this made a difference in disclosing things that in the past nobody wanted to look at or deal with?
Yeah. No, as I said before, the concept and the importance, while always important, but the attention has accelerated, and it's not going to go away, I don't think, ever. And in some ways, I'm you know, kind of philosophically much against a lot of regulation. Let the market, you know, kind of dictate, and the market is dictating, you know, what we need to disclose and what, frankly, how we need to run the organization, and you know, in balance with the primary day-to-day, you know, how we make money for our shareholders. And so 10 years ago, you know, nobody expected you to report on these issues. I mean, if you're an oil company, you know, for probably since OPEC, or since the, you know, oil crises of the 70s, for those of us old enough to remember that, you probably have more and more, focus in your reporting, in your public reporting about, the impact of oil embargoes or pollution or whatever on your company because of the cost of that, right? Today, it's much more about, if you're an oil company, are you going to be out of the oil business in the future? And what's the business you're going to replace replace the oil business to continue to be a company? So it has that piece, component of it is like, how is your business what are the risks to your businesses and how is it going to survive in the future and thrive in the future? That's what you're, at least one viewpoint that shareholders are expecting to have. And the other is, the impact of that oil business on global warming. So, it's an evolution. But I think some of the trickier things. So for us, again, we got to scale, we committed the resources to measure our energy utilization. We started measuring and identifying abilities to lower that, have a direct impact. So that's exciting to measure. Now, in our ESG reports, we made 3-year commitments, and we report every year where we are on those 3-year commitments. And then that's a rolling 3 years. So every year we produce additional requirements, goals for ourselves, but then come back and report how we're performing on those goals. And so I think you have to make a commitment to that. If you can't put out goals and say you want to be held accountable and want to be transparent and then not report bad findings. You got to report the findings, whatever they are. Within S and particularly with DE&I, diversity, equity, inclusion, you've had for years kind of these EEO1 reports where you reported to the government what your workforce demographics looked like, but that wasn't something you necessarily published to the world, good or bad, right or wrong. Some did, some didn't. I've never been embarrassed to do it or not to do it. But now it's, an expectation. And frankly, it's a good way to hold your organization accountable to achieving diversity goals when you're hiring, diversity goals in your promotion and career development, and diversity goals with your board. So I think it's a good thing. I think it certainly helps us, be more accountable. And I've been honest to say during the social issue unrest of 2020, I looked around our organization and it just frankly didn't reflect the diversity that it should have. And by reporting that and reporting our gendered diversity within the organization and our broader ethnic issues or ethnic background of the organization, I think it's created a more intentional focus of our organization to hire across a diverse background. And then when we have opportunities for career development and career advancement, we're focused on everybody in the organization and helping them achieve their goals. And ultimately that'll serve us well.
That's terrific. We've got an interesting question that came in. Do you invest in environmental projects outside the buildings you manage? For example, rain gardens, permeable parking lots, riparian buffers along streams. There may be no direct return for the tenants, but may enhance the landscaping around the buildings. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I take kind of a fork there. So for the real estate we own and the real estate that is ancillary to and kind of beneficial in servicing our buildings, we've made more and more investments in green roofs, in better plant selection, that for the area that doesn't require as much hydration. Things like that, better materials in the building, in the building construction. We have a couple of buildings with large solar panel arrays, where we're essentially generating power for the building itself. So that's been more through acquisition than our own development financing, but that's something that we're trying to do more and more of. Have we just written a check to a local organization for an environmental impact? I say we have in some small amounts. We've done some, volunteer work around community, river cleanups and things like that, and pollution cleanups. We haven't invested in, when I think of it as an investment in a project that has an environmental benefit to the community, but not necessarily a direct benefit to our buildings. But something we certainly wouldn't object to and would think about. But we've done a lot around our buildings and really trying to use, again, our buildings as a vehicle for good, both for our tenants, but also for the communities.
That's terrific on that. Now, I'm trying to, how do you want, I guess a couple of questions is, how much intellectual time does this take for you as a CEO, the emphasis on you've talked about, people ask you lots of questions, and I mean, how much focus on your part, and do you watch your competitors in terms of what they're doing and try and compare, do some peer measuring with respect to these ESG matters?
Yeah, it takes a lot of time. I mean, I think, one of the, I never have quite figured out what percentages of my time are devoted to, kind of the major components of my time, but 25 to 30% of my time is dealing directly with our investors on a routine basis. So not 3 hours every day, but, some days it may be 100% of my time, some days it may be zero, but it's fairly routine and fairly continuous. And, as I said before, 8 years ago, nobody asked a single question. Today, I mean, nobody talks to us without asking some question. So again, part of my job is to anticipate what those questions are and anticipate what their issues are, and kind of feed that information to them in a broad way, complying with Reg FD around, full disclosure, to the broader market, but at the same time, answering their questions. So it's a pretty sizable commitment of my time. As I said before, we don't have a single person whose sole job is to focus on any one of these factors, but some people have 70-80% of their time focus on these issues, or they may directly impact kind of the construction and the maintenance of buildings, where I can argue that 100% of their time is focused on how to improve their buildings. And so it's a big time commitment, and you got to be intentional.
One thing that I enjoyed hearing about, this is a slightly different topic, but I was really impressed with how you dealt with the COVID crisis and the effect it had on your tenants. Because I know some of your tenants had a more difficult time than others. And I believe I remember you talking about how you would actually work with them to help them get the government, the PPE loans and things like that, to consult with them and help them that they'd be able to weather the crisis. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So again, the idea, the business model, the thesis of medical office buildings in particular is they're recession resilient and recession proof. So 2009, 2010, last kind of big recession we had before COVID was a good period to kind of look back at, which is that during the recession you might not have gone to the movie, you might not have gone on vacation, that's not going to a hotel, you might not go to a mall and buy clothes. But if your child got sick or your parent got sick, you took them to the doctor, and the doctor took care of them, and you one way or the other, paid your healthcare bill, and then the doctor paid the rent. And so that's the business model of healthcare real estate is really, kind of as simple as that in many respects. So during the pandemic, the issue is, well, if the doctor's office is closed because of COVID, could they pay their rent? And what we found, and again, it's just we weren't investing, and our strategy wasn't to invest away from hospitals because of COVID or infectious disease, but our business model and strategy kind of was successful last year, because the buildings we invest in aren't the buildings where COVID patients were going. They're buildings we invest in are primarily, surgical facilities and oncology facilities and kind of outpatient care facilities, not an emergency room and not an inpatient hospital where if you had COVID and were really sick, you went straight to the hospital and got admitted. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, like everybody was scared and didn't know, is this the end of the world? Are we back to one of those end of world events, or is how are we going to get through this? And what's it going to look like on the back end? And, what we found was after a month, kind of the healthcare system arranged itself where we're going to take care of COVID patients in the hospitals. The hospital is going to be the priority location, and either by government mandate or by just, practical reality, if you didn't have COVID, for a few months or for a month or in 2 months in some states, unless it was an emergency and you really couldn't get care at all. But that quickly dissipated where, realized the hospitals could be for inpatient COVID and medical office and other outpatient care facilities could be for kind of for all other care that wasn't emergent. And so the offices went back to work very quickly. Now, parallel that with, the government came out with the original CARES Act, the kind of massive bill to, subsidize the healthcare system, kind of keep it afloat and subsidize a lot of industries. And then there was the PPP program, which was, all designed around small businesses, compensating their employees basically to stay at home, but at the same time, not, putting the company out of business. A lot of our tenants are physicians that are small businesses in and of themselves. And so for those tenants, what we said was, look, you don't pay your rent in April with your April billings. What you do is you pay your April rent with your February billings because you collect it in March and you pay your rent in April. Who knows how long this is going to last? We can help you and we can give you rent deferral for some period of time. But what's more important is when you don't have any cash flow coming in, you don't have any, AR you're collecting, that's when you're going to need us the most. So, pay your rent now, but the longer this goes on, the more we can be, helpful and for longer term. And so what we did was essentially hired a couple of consultants and said, look, we're going to help you get through. We're going to pay these consultants to help you get through this brand new program, this PPP program. And, once you collect your PPP loan, backed by the government, we'll pay for this, but, on the premise that you'll pay your rent and, from those proceeds. And so, it's kind of
did you hire consultants to help them?
We did. And a good number of tenants took advantage of it and appreciate it and then paid the rent. And, the vast majority of our tenants were, larger, sophisticated organizations. They either didn't qualify for the PPP program or just, paid the rent because the reality was they were collecting revenue and could pay the rent. So it's not as, I'd say magnanimous maybe as you made it sound, but it was really just, kind of partnering with the tenants. And for those that really, really had the challenges early on and had a hard time getting, back to the office and taking care of patients and generating revenue. We worked with those tenants, but we only had one, fairly large tenant that we had to enter into a formal agreement with. They wouldn't pay the rent for a few months, but then later paid back the rent. And so again, it's just working with your tenants, working with the communities they're in, helping them be successful. But again, our knee-jerk reaction wasn't, don't pay your rent, don't worry about it. It was, hey, let's measure this out because we can be more helpful, 6 months from now, when you really need the help, if you really need the help, than day one where you really didn't need the help, but you just want the relief. So it's a balance. But we got to the right result and built great tenant relationships out of it.
Yeah. One reason I like this series is to bring in individuals like yourself. How has your legal training and your experience as a lawyer influenced you now as you're running this real estate company? I mean, I assume you understand legal issues, but you're probably not doing a lot of legal work right now. How has it made you a better manager, do you think, the training that you had, or were there some bad habits perhaps you developed as a lawyer that you've had to overcome as a manager?
Now, Christian, I've talked about this a lot. I mean, I think the most important benefit to legal training is just the ability to process decisions, process information, take in the facts, understand the situation, and then make decisions based upon kind of either the rule of law or the rule of of logic of the situation you're in. And I think what I just described is, a pretty good example of that, which was, again, it was easy to say, just don't pay your rent till you're back in business. But at the same time, the logical thing to do was, well, you have the money to pay your rent now, pay it. And then in the future, when you really can't pay it, then we can be more beneficial to you and work with you more at that point. So, I and other, I'll say, former full-time lawyers are now, say more in a management role, not a pure legal role, kind of joke about being either a recovering lawyer or a recovered lawyer. Not that we're not proud of our legal background and law degree generally, but I think it's, if you're struggling with what to do in your career, particularly early in your life, I tell people, go to law school because it gives you such great training to do, lots of different things in the future and lots of interesting things. So I wouldn't change anything about the kind of the path that I followed. And again, my non-legal positions evolved out of my legal job. So it was just a matter of just kind of an evolution of, working for a client who asked me to come in-house, who asked me to do things more than just, run the legal department or manage legal affairs. And, part of that in one job with Baylor led to running government affairs, which I had no direct experience with. It was but it was logical, something I enjoyed and something that fit, naturally with my legal background. And again, that's been a big part of my path in my career.
And again, this is straying a little bit from our topic, but might be of interest to the group. From your vantage point, when you're looking at all of this, all the purchases that you're making and what big commercial real estate is doing, do you have any kind of thoughts about what you're seeing over the next few years with respect to real estate values? I don't know if you want to restrict it to your area, which is medical facilities, or kind of what's your just general thoughts, maybe?
Yeah, great question. And one you could go in a lot of different directions. So, the interesting thing, so medical in a microcosm is kind of easy to understand in the sense of, last year, if you own medical office buildings and you're, again, a big institutional owner like we are, there's public companies that are similar to us. There's big private companies or big pension plans that own, big portfolios of medical office. The reality is, the situation I just described, for the most part, they all collected 99 or 90+% of their rent last year. We collected 99.6% of our rent last year. We've had no issues this year, despite the ongoing pandemic, again, because physicians and hospitals are in the buildings taking care of patients and collecting revenue, and they can pay their rent. So there's no surprise that our real estate, as real estate, has become even more valuable in the last year. And then I think everybody knows and experiences now there's kind of winners and losers in this, but the vast majority of residential real estate in the United States is more valuable this year than it was last year for lots of different reasons. And you can kind of layer in government, funding and subsidy and low interest rates and lots of factors that have led to that. But, and people leaving, urban communities and wanting to move to the suburbs, because they don't want to be in high rises with other, from infectious disease. And that's, Florida's on fire. But so it's, you talk about all the people moving out of California, but California real estate's not plummeting. It's more expensive today than it was last year in most cases as well. So, I think, in uncertainty, and one of the benefits of like a real estate investment trust like us is you are investing in a company that has hard assets. I guess Amazon kind of has hard assets, but Amazon has, originally was just, an idea and apps that don't have, necessarily physical assets, but they have great intellectual property. Our intellectual property is, I wouldn't say it's so great, but it's the intellectual property we apply to make, investments in hard assets. In inflationary times, those, hard assets presumably, have more, more value long-term. So I think that's part of it. So, when there's uncertainty, kind of investing in hard assets, one form or another, kind of creates more value. The more dollars chasing a limited supply, the value of the limited supply goes up. And, I think that's what we've seen the last couple of years, again, against all kinds of real estate, even real estate that didn't do well last year, in some ways has become more valuable as people see it as an opportunity to, invest low and sell high. So we've seen that in some classes of real estate. The real estate investment trust, I kind of jumped ahead a minute ago, which is the beauty of the public company that owns real estate is it's very liquid. So you can buy and sell our company tomorrow. You can buy and sell, if you buy a share of our stock, you're buying a little sliver of 275 buildings in 38 states. But tomorrow, if you don't want to own that building anymore, you just sell it. Versus, if you talk about your house or simple house or a simple real estate investment you made, it's very difficult. It's illiquid, at least for a period of time. So you can't just decide tomorrow I'm going to sell my house and sell it that afternoon. Now in Nashville, maybe you could do that, but that's not a constant theme. So, I think real estate in all asset classes, not going anywhere. There's a limited supply. It's getting tighter and tighter, particularly in some communities. Again, then it's just a matter of, picking winners and losers like in any investment asset.
John, this has been a terrific discussion. We've only got about 2 minutes left. Do you have any last remaining thought before we let people go?
Yeah, just, where we started. I appreciate the time and discussion. Happy to answer any questions you might pick up after this. But, again, the importance of environmental kind of social justice and social impact and transparent governance is extremely important. It's here to stay. It's built into our culture. There's things we could always do better, but I think we're very focused philosophically, but also organizationally as part of our culture to do better with respect to each one of those factors, and more will come. And we're constantly learning. Again, how we can have an important impact on the communities we serve, but while at the same time not forgetting what ultimately our organization is about, which is generating shareholder value. There's lots. We're a dividend paying stock. There's lots of widows and widowers who rely on our dividend monthly to eat and to pay their medical bills. And so, we think a strong focus on ESG principles can also deliver high shareholder returns. So they're not in conflict, but they need to be in balance, and we think we approach them in a balanced way. But appreciate the time tonight.
Well, thanks everybody. I know I've got a couple of questions we didn't get to, but we've run out of time, and I'll forward them to John, and maybe we'll be able to work something out. But we appreciate John speaking to us and taking all this time, and watch our calendar where we're going to be creating other kinds of conversation programs just like this. So thanks everyone. Appreciate it.
Have a good night. Thanks.